Not many of you should become teachers, my brothers, for you know that we who teach will be judged with greater strictness. For we all stumble in many ways, and if anyone does not stumble in what he says, he is a perfect man, able also to bridle his whole body. If we put bits into the mouths of horses so that they obey us, we guide their whole bodies as well. Look at the ships also. Though they are so large and are driven by strong winds, they are guided by a very small rudder wherever the will of the pilot directs. So also the tongue is a small member, yet it boasts of great things. How great a forest is set ablaze by such a small fire! And the tongue is a fire, a world of unrighteousness. The tongue is set among our members, staining the whole body, setting on fire the entire course of life, and set on fire by hell.
I've got a title over James 3 that says Taming the Tongue. I think the ESV editors did a fantastic job. But when I read that title, and I got a feeling your translation has a similar title, if not like that, I got the impression that James 3 is about taming the tongue. How to tame the tongue. And so I read it with that picture, and you get the first 6 verses, and you realize, man, the tongue has incredible power. It can set forests ablaze by the fires of hell. It stains the whole body. And I read it though, waiting for that command, tame the tongue, tame the tongue, tame the tongue. And I never found it. But you see what's also backing my mindset on this is the sermons and the messages I've heard on taming the tongue, which came from James 3. And so I read it again with this question. What is James 3 about? If I could erase all preconceived notions of James 3, what would I end up with? And I read it again. It said, it's not about taming the tongue. In fact, he exempts people from taming the tongue because he says you cannot tame the tongue. What James 3 is about is teachers and the leniency of God on his children. So, Matthew 28, the Great Commission. Actually, before I get there, I read this morning. Jeremiah was called by God at a young age to go and preach the word to Israel and Judah. And this is a prophecy for Israel. And I will give you shepherds after my own heart who will feed you with knowledge and understanding. I say this is what James 3 is about. The shepherds feeding you with knowledge and understanding. But I want to ask the question, as a preacher, how does this apply to people like yourself? How does a passage really designed for people like me, apply to you? And it's incredible. I mean, today we're going to look at the student-teacher relationship and God's leniency, his love, and his mercy on them. I want to jump back into James 1, though. I want to pick up a couple key verses to catch us up real quick. It's been a while to James 3. James 1:18, of his own will he brought you forth by the word. That word is logos. If you go back to James 1, we talked about this word logos. It's a complex word with a lot of power. But I want to bring up something that I brought up several weeks ago. And it was this word logos. He brought you forth by the word, the logos of truth. Plato said that he observed that the word logos has the power to establish fellowship. Logos, let me put it to you like this. If we're talking back and forth, we're communicating, I'm talking, you're talking, I'm talking, you're talking, what's between us is a logos, communication. And if we agree on the truth, we have formed fellowship. And so what Plato noticed was that the word logos has a power to it to bring people together. And what James says is that God brought you forth by the word of truth. So he put this truth in you so you could hear it. When he talks to you, you hear the truth, and you say, man, that sounds right. And he calls you by name. And now all of a sudden you got fellowship with God. Not because you found the truth, but because he put it in you, and now he can talk to you at a new level. That you should be a kind of first fruits. Okay, so James shows you God's desire for you. You should be. You should be a kind of first fruits. So what God wants for you. The first to receive the blessings of all creatures. You will be an heir to a kingdom. In other words, you are being assimilated into a family, into a kingdom, into a throne. There's a king in you. So you should be, there's a process going on, and God will have his way with you. This is his plan, his desire. He established the word of truth. He's talking to you. You're hearing his voice, and you should be the first to receive his blessings. That first fruits of his creatures. That's kind of the idea. I'm going to go to James chapter 2. I'm going to jump a lot here just for quick repetition. James chapter 2. You see that a person, now James is talking about, is justified by works and not by faith alone. So now James is talking about your faith. Okay? This word justified really throws a lot of people off in James, because Paul uses the same word to talk about your justification before God. Paul says you are justified by faith alone. Well, in James 2, you look at the context and you see James is talking about a different type of justification. A justification between you and someone else. Between you and a friend. You and a peer. You and a teacher. James is talking about justifying your faith in front of humanity. You say that you have faith. So, all right, let me back up real quick here. Verse 18, James chapter 2, verse 18. Someone will say, you have faith and I have works. Show me your faith apart from your works. You see, there's a communication, there is a relationship here James is talking about. That you are talking to someone about your faith. And James says, you have faith and I have works. Show me your faith apart from your works. I will show you my faith by my works. Verse 24, you see a person is not justified by works, by faith alone, but by works and faith. You are proving your faith to those around you by your works. In fact, it talks about Rahab, and it talks about Abraham completing their faith by their works. The works is the completion of your faith, but what are the works? Well, specifically, mercy. You back up in James chapter 2, and we see that James is talking about not showing partiality to the poor. Have mercy on all. And that mercy is an emotion aroused by the affliction of someone else. You see someone in their afflicted state, and that should arouse compassion and love. That is mercy. That is the works of faith. So here we go into James 3, verse 1. James has laid a beautiful foundation of what God is doing in you and how it's completed in this world. The face of faith is mercy, it is works. And then he says this, not many of you should become teachers, my brother. For you know that we who teach will be judged with greater strictness. I got a question for you. All right. When you're reading scriptures, you want to ask questions as you go. You just ask this question. Why would James say, not many of you should become teachers? Why is this important to James? Let's be real. His brother, we assume James is the brother of Jesus. And it is an assumption. We could be wrong. There are several James in the Bible, but there seems to be a lot of proof that James is the brother of Jesus. At the end of Matthew, it says this. I mean, you know it very well. I could probably just recite it. Go, therefore, and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all that I've commanded you. James says, not many of you should become teachers. In fact, he's laid out a beautiful gospel. He's laid out the good news. He's laid out hope for all humanity. If you didn't know verse 1, and I asked you, what do you think James thinks about, us evangelizing? Well, we all should run out there and start telling people about Jesus. I mean, it would seem like that would be the answer. And he says, no, not many of you should be teachers. And that word teacher that James uses is the noun form of the word Jesus uses, the Greek form. I mean, we're in the Greek. They weren't speaking Greek, but it's recorded in the Greek. They're the same words. And if you're anything like me, you've probably carried at some point in your life a burden and possibly lived in guilt of not evangelizing enough, not teaching enough, not talking about Jesus enough. I mean, when is enough enough? Why does James say, when Jesus says, I mean, look, the answer is pretty obvious. Matthew 28, he's speaking to 11 apostles. It wasn't a command that was meant to be placed upon all the children of God. It was for 11 apostles. James shows you later in chapter 3 how we do, I would use the word teach, how we do reveal the glory of God. We all do it, and it comes very natural. It's very easy. There's no guilt. There's no burden. It's who you are, and we'll get there in a few weeks. I want to ask, well, why does he say this? And the answer, though, speaks very loudly about God's care about you. But first, this word teacher, the daskon is used for the impartation of knowledge when there is a continued activity with a view to gradual, systematic, and therefore all the more fundamental assimilation. In other words, you have a goal for the person you're teaching. They're a mission, right? When you're teaching, you want to get your student, your pupil from point A to point C. And that's going to happen through what you say to them. You want them to think a certain way, be a certain way, believe a certain way, trust a certain way, act a certain way. You have a goal in mind. And to get them there, you teach them. You are assimilating them into this vision that you have. So the idea of teaching is that, I see you and I have hope for you, that you get somewhere in your journey with the Lord, in your trust, in your faith. So this is how this word is being used. But I want to show you an image, and I want to interact with it for just a few minutes. An image of, we'd call a teacher and a student. I think he's teaching him the alphabet. I want you to look at this image for a moment. Just soak in it. I mean, look at the faces. Look at how he's sitting and how he's standing. Just take it in and learn what you can about this situation. I mean, what does that show you about the teacher? What does it show you about the kid? To start, I want to show you the idea of the Logos. Okay, we already brought this up, that the Lord has called you forth by the Logos of truth, the word of truth. What is going on in this image is a Logos, the power of the Logos to bring two people together to commune, to have fellowship. So this is a picture of the power or the result of the Logos, the word of truth. So there's a Logos taking place between the two. Let's talk about the student real quick. What do we learn about the student? What must a student have in order to learn? Where should he be mentally, emotionally? Let's learn about the student real quick. First, the student has to be vulnerable to be taught. You have to be open. You have to open yourself to saying, I don't know, therefore teach me. Or, I may be wrong, therefore teach me. You can use the word humble. It's a natural humility. We see this in children. Our children are born open and vulnerable and in humility in order to receive what they need to learn from their parents. He also has to be subordinate. All right? I mean, peers can teach each other a little bit, but if he places himself under authority, then he gives the teacher the ability to drive into his mind and into his heart a new set of beliefs. The more he places himself in a level or a position of subordinacy, the more power he gives to the teacher. He's got to be open, vulnerable. He's got to be subordinate. And these are things that naturally take place in this relationship. But he also has to trust. He has to trust his teacher. If he doesn't trust it, if you're skeptical of me, chances are you're not receiving the information that I'm teaching. He has to trust. Children do this naturally. You are born into a family vulnerable, under authority, and trusting. You don't have to work on it. These things happen. And over time, you begin to become aware of your surroundings, aware of your beliefs, and you begin to shut down certain elements, and eventually you fly out of the nest, hopefully, and you go and become a father, a mother, and the cycle repeats. So therefore, the student, the pupil, is in a very delicate state. So you get this. In order to learn, you have to place yourself in a delicate position. In that position, you are primed to be manipulated and money to be exacted from you. If a teacher can get you to believe a certain false doctrine, he can get you to do just about anything. And you got the stories and drinking the Kool-Aid, and there's stories after stories of cults where this happens. But you're in a delicate state. Sure, you are in a delicate position, and you've placed yourself there willingly. Let's talk about the teacher real quick. There's a few elements that the teacher has to have. One, he has to have respect for the student. He has to see that the student is open and vulnerable, and he has to respect the student. Now, okay, we are outside of James 3. I am reading things I'm basically asking, what is James not saying? And I want to hear why does James say not many of you should be teachers? I mean, what is going on behind the scenes in James' mind and in the Lord's mind? I'm going to just dissect that relationship. He has to respect his student. He has to also realize he has influence. The power of condemnation and the power to empathize. Think about this for a moment. A student, you are open, you are vulnerable, you are trusting, and your teacher can either he can either condemn you and place a burden upon you, guilt upon you, or he can set you free. He can empathize with where you're at in life and set you free. His influence is great. It's powerful. And he has to love. He has to have love for his students. Without it, he's not a teacher. Without love for the student, the teacher does not exist. He is there for himself. Jesus represented this teacher very well at the Great Commission, Matthew 28. Jesus says to these doubting disciples, who don't know what to do next in life, but they gather to see Jesus post-resurrection. And Jesus says, look, I have all influence. I have all authority in heaven and on earth. It's been given to me. Jesus sets himself up and states, I am the great teacher that they all cleared I am. Now I'm going to give you the power of influence, the power of love. And he picked these 11 guys because the work he was doing in them, of showing them that they are love, they are mercy, they will have the power to influence in a way of changing the world. So where do I get lenient God from? You see, if you read James 3 and you believe James 3 is about taming your tongue, you're not going to see it. But if you remember that teachers teach students, the pupil, the student is in a delicate state. You got to also remember this, that the teacher's purpose, she must be 100% selfless because of the position of the student. The teacher cannot have a bone of selfish ambition in him. She must be perfect in their intentions. Perfect. The moment that perfection leaves just to let in a little bit of selfishness, a little bit of fear of how am I going to take care of my family financially, a little bit of doubt, are you getting it? A little bit of, I think they're swerving, a little bit of selfish ambition will destroy the purpose and the mission of the teacher as James lays it out to establish you in the word of truth. A teacher, as God wants it, is designed to set you free. Therefore, can't have any selfish ambition. And look, preaching to myself. Is that possible? Absolutely. Well, we all, including myself, including James, stumble in many ways. And if anyone does not stumble in what he says, he is a perfect man, able also to bridle his whole body. It's an interesting verse that follows verse 1. Not many of you should be teachers, my brothers, for we know that those who teach will be judged with a greater strictness. I mean, the moment you place yourself in front, a judgment that just swirls around you from within, from outside, it just overcomes you. It's the way it is. It's just the way it is. We all stumble. If anyone does not stumble in what he says, he is a perfect man, able to bridle his whole body. See, your goal is not perfection. And we'll see this next week as we talk about these illustrations, the ship, the horse. He's talking about the perfect man inside the teacher. He's talking about that this teacher must be living in utter trust and faith so the perfect man comes out. You see, when I and when you trust in the Lord with all your might, you have no selfish ambition because the Lord takes care of all of your needs. And now I and you and the teacher can truly be set free to seek your good and what you need. And that is to be delivered from the condemnation of sin and placed under the mighty work of grace and mercy. The restriction on the amount of teachers is very telling, and the leniency of God. The restriction on the quantity of teachers is due to God's mercy, his compassion for you, his child. You would expect a story like the Bible, the gospel, the good news. Someone like James would tell the church, run to the streets, go tell the world the good news of Jesus. And yet he pulls the emergency brake. No. Many of you should not do this. And he points to the tongue, and he says, and we'll get to this in a couple weeks, that your tongue reveals, let me just read it to you, verse 13. James 3:13. Who is wise and understanding among you? By his good conduct, let him show his works, his mercy, in the meekness of wisdom. But if you have bitter jealousy and selfish ambition in your heart, do not boast and be false to the truth. You see, the tongue reveals the selfish ambition. And that is the issue that the teacher cannot struggle with. If he becomes selfish, you are now in a place that is very dangerous. And Paul says you can shipwreck your faith. It doesn't steal your faith, but it can shipwreck it. It can toss you into chaos. It can throw you into the outer realms of the storm. But the restriction also reveals God's leniency towards a lot of his children who cannot tame their tongue, and yet they feel guilted into teaching. Many people have heard that they must go out and evangelize. And I was placed under the same burden. I was asked at one point in my life, in order to validate my teaching, how many people have you led to Christ? And I was kind of dumbfounded. I had goose egg. I had no one. So I felt like I had to go out and teach. I got to get someone on the books. But God's leniency towards you by saying, look, you're exempt. If your tongue shows that you are in a state of disorder, I exempt you from teaching. Go live in the good conduct of the works that I'm doing in you. And let the meekness of your wisdom be the teacher. James 3 is not about you taming your tongue. James 3 is about God's care and his utmost compassion for his children. That God, our Father, would rather see less churches and more, as Jeremiah says, the knowledge and understanding of him being taught, than he would see churches pop up everywhere and disorder instilled into his children. James 3 is about protecting you. James 3 is about ensuring that you get the truth of the gospel. And in order to do that, filtering out those teachers who have selfish ambition in their heart. And he does it in a masterful way by not condemning them. But if you read, he simply exempts them. Don't worry about it. You're still okay too. I got a video here put together, I put on Facebook earlier this week that kind of it exemplifies this picture but through a different story, and then the band will come up.
He was a foul-mouthed young man, able to keep up with the most provocative of sailors. But he was also royalty, a prince in his blood. Around his royal family, he would talk like the future king that he was. But in the public square, around his peers, the heir to the throne displayed a much different character. A character that wasn't fit to be a king, at least not in the expected sense. The young man was torn. He knew the blood that traversed his body was special. He was set aside before birth for a specific role, to be a leader of people. Yet his mouth seemed to control him and set a path that was destructive to his inevitable future. Two characters, one man. From the outside, to his family, he looked like a prince. To his friends, a foul-mouthed boy. On the inside, he lived in guilt, not able to deal with the two natures at war with each other. His father, the true king, was perceptive and saw his son struggle and knew what he needed to do. Son, the kingdom is in your heart. The throne awaits. The way you speak will not change your prospect in life. What it will change is the view people will have of the kingdom and the future king. You must not feel obligated to speak of your royalty. In fact, you would be wise not to, as you will be judged with greater strictness one day by all whom you lead. Rather, son, be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to anger. Your tongue will one day catch up with your true nature, the king that I know you are in your heart.